Today, we are talking about one of the most bizarre, dangerous, and just plain unbelievable events in the history of sports, the 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis. I mean, this was a race so absolutely chaotic, it almost got the marathon banned from the Olympics for good. Okay, so let's just jump right in. When you picture a marathon, you're probably thinking of water stations, energy gels, thousands of cheering fans, right? Well, I want you to forget all of that. The 1904 race was something from another planet, a spectacle of human suffering that sounds way more like a tall tale than actual history. Just to give you a little taste of the absurdity, the first guy to cross the finish line was a total fraud. He didn't even run most of the race. He hitched a ride in a car for 11 miles. And the man who was ultimately crowned the real winner, well, he was so delirious from a cocktail of brandy and strychnine, and yes, you heard that right, literal rat poison, that his trainers had to physically drag him across the finish line. This is the absolutely incredible story of the 1904 St. Louis Marathon. It's an event that just perfectly captures the chaotic and sometimes downright dangerous spirit of the early modern Olympics. So, how in the world did things get this bad? Well, the stage was set for complete and utter chaos long before the starting pistol ever fired. The problems really started with the location itself. You see, the 1904 Olympics weren't even the main event in town. They were basically a little sideshow to the massive St. Louis World's Fair. The marathon itself was set for a blistering 90-degree afternoon on dusty country roads. So the runners weren't just fighting the heat. They were literally dodging cars, delivery wagons, and even stray dogs. But the worst part, the part that's almost hard to believe, was the official race philosophy. It was actively dangerous. The head organizer, a guy named James Sullivan, wanted to run this bizarre experiment in what he called purposeful dehydration. He actually believed that limiting water would be a great test of human endurance. And his grand experiment? Just one water stop for the entire 25-mile course. A single well at the 12-mile mark. In 90-degree heat on roads kicking up clouds of dust. I mean, you can already see where this is going. Now, the group of 32 competitors was just as strange and varied as the conditions they were about to run in. It was a true hodgepodge of serious athletes and, well, total amateurs. You had a core group of pretty experienced American runners, guys who'd won the Boston Marathon, people like Thomas Hicks. But then you had this international field, which included Felix Carvajal, a Cuban mailman who supposedly lost all his money in a dice game and had to hitchhike his way to St. Louis. And this really shows you how strange the era was. The first two Black Africans to ever compete in the Olympics, Len Tanyane and John Mashiani, weren't even in St. Louis as athletes. They were performers in the World's Fair's Boer War exhibit. They had been message runners during the actual war, and they just decided to show up on the day of the race and run. It's a pretty bizarre but really historic moment. As soon as the race started at 3 in the afternoon, things immediately started to fall apart. That combination of the brutal heat, the choking dust that was getting kicked up by the officials' cars, and the lack of water just took its toll almost instantly. The race just descended into a medical emergency. By mile 9, an American runner named Fred Lors had already dropped out and hopped in a car. By mile 16, one of the pre-race favorites just collapsed. A mile later, Thomas Hicks's team gives him his first dose of strychnine. And then at mile 19, things got really grim. Another runner, William Garcia, was found unconscious. His stomach lining was literally torn apart by the dust he'd inhaled. He was hemorrhaging and almost died right there on the side of the road. Meanwhile, our Cuban mailman, Felix Carvajal, was having a totally different kind of adventure. He stopped to chat with people, argued over some peaches, and ended up just snatching them and eating them on the run. Later, he ate some rotten apples he found in an orchard, which gave him horrible stomach cramps, so he was forced to lie down and take a nap. A nap? And he still finished in 4th place. Just incredible. So, if you think the race itself was bizarre, the finish was even more unbelievable. Seriously. It involved a practical joker, a nearly dead champion, and the president's daughter. So Fred Lors, the runner who hitched that ride at mile 9, felt pretty refreshed after the car broke down, so he just hopped out and jogged the final few miles into the stadium. He crosses the finish line, he's hailed as the winner, and he's about to get the gold medal from Alice Roosevelt when spectators start shouting that he's a cheat. His defense? It was all just a practical joke. While that whole farce was playing out, the actual leader, Thomas Hicks, was in the middle of a complete nightmare. His trainers were just propping him up with this dangerous cocktail of stimulants. The main ingredient was strychnine, a poison used to kill rats, that in small doses acts as a powerful stimulant. They gave him multiple doses, washed down with raw eggs and brandy, just to keep his legs moving. By the end, Hicks was completely gone. He was hallucinating, thinking the finish line was still 20 miles away. As this quote from an official describes, he was just a shuffling, ashen-faced shell of a man. His trainers had to half carry him across the finish line, holding him up while his feet moved, just so he could be declared the winner. It took 4 doctors over an hour for him to recover enough to even leave the stadium. So, what was the legacy of this man-killing event? Well, believe it or not, this absolute disaster actually helped shape the future of the Olympic Games for the better. This is really why this story matters. Of the 32 athletes who started the race, only 14 actually managed to finish. That's a completion rate of less than 44%. It's the worst ratio in Olympic marathon history, and it's not even close. Hicks's winning time of nearly 3.5 hours is still the slowest ever recorded in the Olympic marathon. It's a full 30 minutes slower than the next slowest time, which is a pretty clear testament to just how brutal these conditions really were. The whole event was such a huge scandal that officials, including the organizer, James Sullivan himself, called for the marathon to be abolished forever. Now, that didn't happen, but there was one positive outcome. The controversy over Hicks using strychnine led directly to the creation of the very first anti-doping rules for the 1908 Olympics. And that really leaves us with a fascinating question. Do we look back on this as a complete farce, just a dangerously absurd spectacle? Or is there something to be said for the sheer will of those 14 men who actually did cross that finish line, a bizarre testament to the absolute limits of human endurance? It's a story that is just hard to forget. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer on the worst race ever run. If you enjoyed this dive into the bizarre side of history, be sure to check out our Unusual History Events playlist for more stories just like it. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Notebook Summaries. We'll see you next time.